Now, to bring us to the next presentation, we have, I'm delighted to say, Professor Jane Stout with us. She is an internationally renowned expert on pollinators and pollination ecology. She's a prominent voice in biodiversity and its value. Her research seeks to understand how land management practices, which includes agriculture and urbanisation, affects ecological processes and the benefits for humans. Jane works across disciplines. She works with a broad range of stakeholders in public and private organisations to improve environmental policy and practice. She leads a large team of researchers in the Plant-Animal Interactions Group in Botany in the School of Natural Sciences in Trinity. She's co-founder and chair of the board of the Irish Forum on Natural Capital, and she's co-founder and deputy chair of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. And many moons ago, I interviewed her for the science programme on bees and pollinators. So Jane, thank you sincerely for being with us today, and let's give her a warm welcome.
Thanks very much, and it's a hard act to follow those two previous presentations, but thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's fantastic to see you all here and to have the opportunity to speak to you. I think I want to start with a bit of context. You know, even though the title of my presentation here, and I was asked to speak about what does biodiversity do to us, for us, you know, why should we care about biodiversity loss? I just wanted to put that in context. And this diagram shows the history of life on our planet, where living organisms evolved about 4 billion years ago. But it wasn't until about 500 million years ago that there was this explosion of diversity, and dinosaurs are about 250 million years ago. But I think the point that I'm trying to make with this is that a lot of the diversity that we see on our planet has been here for much, much longer than us. And in fact, if you condensed the whole history of life on Earth into a single 24-hour period, then the dinosaurs would go extinct at about 20 to midnight at the end of that 24-hour period, and us, humans, would arrive at 2 minutes to midnight. So we've only been here for a tiny amount of time, and we've had a massive impact on our biodiversity. But I think it's just worth starting to think about humans arriving to this planet that was already very diverse. And so when we talk about why should we care about biodiversity loss and what does it do for us, I think the first thing is to remember that it's not all about us, that diversity has evolved over millions of years and is there kind of despite us. I think we probably need to mention the role of biodiversity in our current predicament. So we're all very familiar with this little virus, which right now is causing COVID-19. And it's here with us because of biodiversity loss. So COVID-19, so it's a zoonotic disease, which means it's been transferred into people from animals. And as we cut down more trees, as we expand our grazing lands for livestock, this has brought humans and wild animals into closer contact. And when natural habitats are destroyed, or farming intensifies, or when particular species are traded and handled by people, the risk of disease spread into humans increases. And novel diseases appear in humans. And over the last 20 years, there's been increases in diseases like Ebola, like Zika virus, and now COVID. And in fact, 75% of all new diseases in the past 10 years have come from animals. And this has been predicted by disease ecologists for decades, that this relationship, this breakdown of the relationship between humanity and the natural world puts us at risk. So biodiversity, one of the first reasons we should care about biodiversity loss is that it's really important to us, to our well-being, to our health, and to our societies. We've all seen what's happened over the last 2 years with biodiversity loss and the increased prevalence of this disease. But it's not just the prevalence of disease that's affected by biodiversity loss, it's our ability to treat diseases as well. So biodiversity, that variety of life, provides us with medicines and with cures for diseases. So for example, the cone snail in the top left picture there and the poppy in the top right, both have been the sources of painkillers. And an awful lot of the pharmaceuticals that we use to maintain and regain our health comes from natural products, comes from natural sources. comes from our biodiversity. So we have painkillers from plants and animals, antibiotics from fungi. So in the picture in the middle at the bottom there is penicillin. That's the classic example. And also this wildlife, this biodiversity, this variety of life gives us the opportunity to study diseases and how other organisms react and cope with different situations. So in the bottom left there, we've got polar bears, and polar bears actually provide a model organism for studying diabetes, because polar bears feed on lots of fat in order to keep them going over the winter, so they pile on the fat, but they don't get diabetes, and they're also a model organism for looking into things like osteoporosis. And the absence of nature has a negative impact on our mental well-being and our mental health. So in the bottom right-hand corner there is just a sort of an image to try and capture this idea that stress and anxiety is higher in people who don't have access to nature. So biodiversity, the variety of life being in nature, can improve our mental well-being. And many people enjoy being in nature, so biodiversity is a source of enjoyment for a lot of people, from bird watching and walking or hiking. We can see how important biodiversity is and how important these kind of activities are by the number of people engaging in things like ecotourism and the moth enthusiasts that Ferdia mentioned. There's a lot of enjoyment that can be taken from spending time in nature and examining nature and looking at biodiversity. So one of the, when we're asked why is nature important, why is biodiversity important, one of the answers is something I've just mentioned in terms of our health, but another big answer is in terms of the goods that we get from ecosystems, so the goods and the products that we harvest from nature. So we're thinking about food, so whether that's from the land or from the seas, timber, fibers, like on the left there, they're cotton fibers being harvested. These things are fundamental. They're our life support system. We need food. We need protection from shelter. So this biodiversity, these natural environments allow us to survive. That's what fundamentally humans need. We need protection from the elements, food and water. And biodiversity provides us with those things. And a diversity of wild species means that we can farm or harvest new products. So for things like wild relatives of crops contain genetic diversity, which can be used to increase productivity or can be used to adapt crops as environments change. And of course, a diverse diet is also healthy for us. So we're back to this idea of human health again, is that a diverse diet has been associated with extended longevity, so longer, healthier lives, and also in terms of we see dietary diversity being really important in growth in children as well. And other elements of biodiversity help to create and maintain the conditions from which we can collect our food, our timbers, our fibers. So for example, biodiversity is really important in maintaining healthy soils that are necessary for the production of crops, pollinators for the production of a lot of fruits and vegetables, and also biodiversity helps to regulate water cycles that are really very necessary for obviously for the growth of crops. And actually, when we think about, so even mentioned that I'm a pollination biologist and my research focuses on pollination, and 75% of the world's leading food crops have interactions with animal pollinators. So they are animal pollinated. They need this diversity of wild pollinators in order for crops to be produced. And these are apple flowers. And if you don't have a bee moving pollen from flower to flower, you don't get an apple. So biodiversity can be really important in terms of helping to maintain and increase production. And if we think about soils, we often forget about soils. We often think about soil as just dirt. But 25% of the world's biodiversity is in the soil. There's an awful lot going on in the soil. It's like the last frontier. It's very hard to study because as soon as you dig it up, all those interactions kind of fall to pieces. But there's an awful lot going on in soils. There's lots of fungi, lots of microorganisms like bacteria. There's lots of macroorganisms, little insects and other creatures, worms, worms, all existing within that soil and making sure that that soil is healthy and making sure that that soil is fertile. And in fact, biodiversity isn't just important for producing food, it's also essential for regulating our environment. So by the bogs there in the bottom left-hand picture there, Ferdia mentioned the bogs of Ireland and what an important habitat they are. They're also really important in terms of regulating our climates. So bogs are like giant sponges. They soak up the water, they let that water then dissipate at a steady pace as opposed to flooding. And they also, they store lots of carbons. They're really important in regulating water cycles, in regulating climate. And also they provide habitats for lots of other organisms that can only live in those kind of wild open spaces. It's not all about bogs, so the other pictures that I've got there at the top there in the top left-hand corner, there's a hoverfly, and in the top right we've got a bird feeding its offspring with grubs or larvae of insects. And a lot of animals are really important at providing population regulation. So those hoverflies in the top left there, they are voracious predators in their larval stage, so they prey on aphids. So they play a really important pest control role. And these organisms that are interacting with each other, this diversity and these interactions that occur in healthy ecosystems helps to regulate those ecosystems, so no one species gets out of control. And there's a lot of cultural value in our biodiversity as well. So, you know, we know about fairy trees and lots of myths and legends associated with nature, with natural habitats, with spiritual groves. And a lot of our cultural landscapes, what we see, but also what we hear, the sounds. So Ferdia mentioned the woodpeckers drilling in the woods. If you hear cuckoos in the spring, you know, these sounds of nature are part of our cultural landscape as well. So we think about not just what we see, but also what we hear. And there's a final reason why biodiversity loss affects us. We care about it. We care that it exists. We may never see orangutans in the forests of Indonesia. We may never see these cold water corals deep in the oceans. We have no direct experience of them, and we get nothing from them. But we do feel that they should be protected and not let go extinct. And I think this is a really important concept in terms of why biodiversity loss matters to us, is because we care. We care about these creatures, and we care about the environments in which they live. And all of these, oh, I've missed a slide. All of these benefits or these advantages that we get from biodiversity can be thought of as nature's contributions to people. So that in a policy context, in an international context, this is the language that's used, nature's contributions to people, all these benefits, all these advantages that we get from nature. They're also sometimes referred to as ecosystem services. So in policy and in science, this phrase ecosystem services has been used. But I think if we think more broadly about nature's contributions to people and that we're part of nature, but it's fundamental to us. We need nature. It's our life support system. So there's lots of reasons why biodiversity is important to us. And so I've just tried to sum up those reasons that I've given on this slide here. So number one, it's fundamental for human existence. We wouldn't be here if there wasn't a diverse variety of life around us. It gives a direct and an indirect benefit to our own health and well-being. It provides goods and services, or these contributions, on which we depend and which our societies depend. We like to know that it exists. We like to know that there are orangutans or deep water corals, even if today was the first time you heard about them existing. It's good to know that they're out there. And often nature has this sacred or this moral worth to us. It's not always about using nature, but it's there, the fact that it's there has some inspirational or moral value to us, and we feel an ethical obligation to protect biodiversity. So I'll finish there, and I hope that was useful for you, and I look forward to discussing more with you. Thank you.